What if I told you that just 7 families control nearly 90% of the world's wealth? Not just the big banks, not just the corporations, 7 families. The shocking truth is, these financial dynasties have orchestrated a quiet, hidden takeover of the global economy over the last century, and they've used a secret weapon to pull it off. You probably feel the sting of this now: inflation eating away at your paycheck, debt mounting up with no escape, and job instability creeping around the corner. But what if the real culprit behind this instability isn't just bad policy, but a financial system that has been rigged from the very start? What if the economy you're living in, working in, and trying to survive in was engineered by an elite group of families who control the vast majority of global wealth? And what if the truth about how they did it has been hidden from the public for decades? Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for the unfiltered truth. You're about to see how history has been rewritten, how our financial future has been hijacked, and the dark forces that is still pulling the strings behind closed doors. Stick with me. This is a story you'll never hear in the mainstream. To understand how 7 families came to control almost all of the world's wealth, we need to go way back. The first whispers of this financial empire began around the late 1800s, when industrialization was taking off and the world's economies were shifting from agriculture to mass production. But this wasn't a new era of opportunity for everyone. For the elites, it was a time to cement their financial power. The families we're talking about have names that might sound familiar: the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Morgan, and others. These names were the architects of what we now know as the centralized banking system, the very system that controls everything from interest rates to the money supply. By manipulating and monopolizing this power, they laid the groundwork for an economic system that, even today, serves their interests above everyone else's. The Federal Reserve, created in 1913, is the backbone of this system. Sound familiar? That's the central bank that controls the monetary policy of the United States and, indirectly, much of the world. It was designed to regulate the economy, prevent inflation, and protect consumers. But what it's actually done is give these families and their descendants the ability to control the flow of money on an international scale, no matter who sits in the Oval Office. At the turn of the century, these families didn't just want to control money. They wanted to control assets, oil, steel, and real estate. This is where the Rockefeller dynasty comes into play. Through the Standard Oil monopoly, they controlled nearly 90% of the global oil supply. The wealth they generated gave them the power to shape national and global policy, influencing not only the US government but also governments across the globe. Sound familiar? Today, we still see oil barons and energy giants holding immense influence. ExxonMobil, Chevron, and others continue to profit from the same fossil fuel monopoly, while their wealth enables them to fund political campaigns, secure military contracts, and control entire sectors of the global economy. And let's not forget J.P. Morgan, a name that became synonymous with banking and financial power. Morgan helped finance the railroads, which were the lifeblood of the growing U.S. economy, and later became involved in the creation of major banks that dominate the global financial system today. This network of banking families continues to profit from the financialization of everything from stocks and bonds to real estate and insurance. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The global wealth gap we see today, the one where the rich get richer while the middle class shrinks, was not an accident. It's been carefully engineered over decades by these families using a combination of financial products and corporate monopolies that funneled wealth upward. The system was designed to keep them in power, while everyone else had to fight for scraps. By the time we hit the 1960s and 70s, these families had extended their financial grip into new industries, including technology and media. Companies like Microsoft, Apple, and Google didn't just rise because of innovation. They rose because these same families had the financial clout to control the flow of investment capital into these companies. They held the keys to the economy, and by extension, the keys to your financial future. Sound familiar? Big tech has become a powerful financial force in the modern world, just like the industrial giants of the early 20th century. We see the same game being played today with Apple, Amazon, and Facebook, controlling vast swaths of the global economy and shaping public policy with their wealth. But how did these families pull it off? How did they move from controlling oil and steel to dominating the entire financial ecosystem? The answer lies in a mechanism that almost no one talks about, but one that's crucial to understanding how this wealth monopoly works: derivatives and the shadow banking system. Now, stay with me here because what I'm about to reveal might just blow your mind. The derivatives market, a multi-trillion-dollar global industry, was the financial tool that allowed these families to leverage their wealth and expand their empire exponentially. But here's the kicker. Derivatives, on their own, don't have any real value. They're essentially betting slips bets on future performance, bets on interest rates, bets on currencies and commodities. The size of the derivatives market today is over $600 trillion, more than 6 times the entire global GDP. But here's the real twist. It wasn't until 2008, when the financial crisis hit, that the full scope of how dangerous and how controlled this system came to light. You won't believe the name behind the 2008 housing crash that triggered the Great Recession, and the reason it ties directly to these 7 families. The financial world collapsed under the weight of this massive, unseen mechanism, and yet, these families walked away largely unscathed. You'll see how they profited off the crash, and how you ended up paying the price. The receipt is wilder than you think. Let's break this down, because this is where the true machinery of global control lies. When we talk about the 7 families, we are not just talking about old money and inheritance. We are talking about an interconnected web of banks, holding companies, investment vehicles, and trusts that form a hidden empire of control. These families, Rothschild, Rockefeller, Morgan, DuPont, Goldman, Schiff, and the Lazard lineage, learned one simple truth early on. He who controls credit controls nations, and credit debt is the lifeblood of the modern economy. After the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, a moment many call the greatest heist in American history, the groundwork was laid. The Fed was sold to the public as a stabilizing force, but behind closed doors, it became a private cartel of banks dominated by these families' interests. The Rothschilds, with branches in London, Paris, and Frankfurt, financed wars, governments, and even both sides of conflicts. During the Napoleonic Wars, Nathan Rothschild made a fortune betting on British government bonds when everyone else thought they'd collapse. That single move gave the family the leverage to dominate European finance for the next 150 years. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the same formula evolved through derivatives, credit default swaps, and shadow banking. Now, here is where the derivatives mechanism becomes the key to understanding how 7 families could control 90% of global wealth. A derivative is a financial contract whose value derives from something else: stocks, bonds, commodities, currencies, you name it. On the surface, it looks harmless, even useful for hedging risk. But in reality, it became the ultimate financial weapon. Imagine a casino, but the chips represent entire countries. Instead of gambling for entertainment, they're gambling for control. By the 1990s, derivatives had grown from a $3 trillion market into something monstrous $100 trillion by 2000. Today, it's estimated at over $600 trillion, with some shadow estimates placing it closer to $1 quadrillion when off-book trades are included. That's $1,000 trillion more money than exists in the real economy. Here's where the manipulation becomes undeniable. These contracts are mostly over-the-counter, OTC, meaning they're unregulated and hidden from public view. Who dominates this market? A few select megabanks: J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, and HSBC, all tracing ownership or control lines back to those 7 families. That's not a coincidence. It's architecture. They don't just own wealth, they own the system that creates it. During the 2008 crisis, these derivatives imploded. Mortgage-backed securities collapsed, trillions vanished, and the world plunged into panic. Yet, in the chaos, the same families emerged stronger. While millions lost their homes, the top 1% gained over $10 trillion in new wealth through bailouts, mergers, and asset grabs. It wasn't failure. It was a reset engineered and controlled. And the proof? Look at the Federal Reserve's emergency programs during the 2008 collapse. $16 trillion in secret loans distributed to global banks, many with deep ties to these family empires. J.P. Morgan received over $391 billion in liquidity support. Goldman Sachs received $814 billion. Citigroup? A staggering $2.5 trillion in cumulative assistance. When regular citizens begged for bailouts, they got austerity. When the elites needed rescue, they got a blank check. That's the modern formula for global wealth control, a perpetual cycle of crisis and consolidation. And it didn't stop there. The aftermath of 2008 wasn't the end. It was the template. By 2010, major central banks coordinated to expand quantitative easing printing money to stabilize markets. But who benefited? Asset holders, stock owners, private equity firms, all tied to the same dynastic bloodlines. Between 2010 and 2020, global billionaires increased their wealth by over 1,100%. Meanwhile, the median worker's real wages stagnated or declined. That's not capitalism, it's feudalism reborn in digital form. Now, let's talk about shadow banking, the next phase of elite control. Shadow banking is the network of non-bank financial intermediaries, hedge funds, private equity, insurance firms, and offshore trusts that move trillions in hidden capital each day. These aren't regulated like traditional banks. They exist in the dark, far from public scrutiny. Estimates put the size of the shadow banking system at over $220 trillion as of 2024, double the size of the entire global economy. This system allows the same families to leverage, lend, and create liquidity outside traditional oversight. If central banks are the visible hand of control, shadow banking is the invisible hand moving markets, currencies, and even governments. They can crash a market on Monday, short it on Tuesday, and buy the ashes by Friday. The key players, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, control over $25 trillion in assets combined. But follow their ownership structures, and you find cross-holdings among the same family networks: Rothschild Investment Corporation, Rockefeller Capital Management, and legacy funds like Lazard Freres, still acting as advisors to global institutions. These are not random coincidences. They are a continuation of a multi-generational strategy. Create money from debt, expand through financialization, consolidate during crises, and tighten control through innovation. The next phase? Digital currencies and central bank digital currencies. CBDCs will allow central banks, and by extension, the elite families who influence them, to control every transaction, every account, and every individual's access to money. Imagine a system where your paycheck can be frozen for a policy violation, your spending restricted to approved goods, and your savings expire if you don't spend them fast enough. That's not speculation. That's the blueprint of the digital financial prison being built right now. And who's advising most central banks on this rollout? The Bank for International Settlements, known as the Central Bank of Central Banks. Its founding members included, yes, the same 7 financial dynasties. Every time you hear the phrase economic reset, remember, they don't mean reform, they mean realignment of ownership. You lose sovereignty. they gain efficiency. When you trace it all, derivatives, shadow banking, CBDCs, it all converges into one singular reality. Wealth is not distributed, it's engineered upward. And the endgame is not competition, it's consolidation. We are about to dive into something so crucial that it reveals why today's financial elites have their hands on almost everything you see around you, from the food you buy to the job you have, the house you live in, and yes, the rising debt on your credit cards. And it all starts with money creation, the invisible force that shapes our world. You might have heard the term fractional reserve banking before, but that's just the surface. The true magic trick behind wealth concentration is a system that makes money out of nothing. Not just loans, not just credit, but a multiplier effect that turns paper into gold over and over again. To understand this, let's break down the derivatives market. It's a shadow system that operates in the background, invisible to most, but one that moves quadrillions of dollars daily. Yes, quadrillions, and it's entirely unregulated. What does that mean for you? The 7 families that control 90% of global wealth are betting on your future without your knowledge. Here's how. A derivative is essentially a bet on the price of something: a stock, a commodity, a currency, whether it goes up or down. The problem is, derivatives aren't tied to actual assets. They're tied to bets that can be as high as the sky itself. In fact, the derivatives market is now over $600 trillion in size. To put that in perspective, the entire global economy is only worth about $100 trillion. But the real kicker? These massive, unregulated markets allow banks and financial institutions to make money without actually owning anything. They're just trading risk, selling promises, bets, and predictions, all in the name of profit. Here's how it works. Imagine 2 mega banks, let's say Bank A and Bank B. Bank A makes a bet that oil prices will go up, and Bank B makes a bet that they'll go down. Both of these banks will now hold massive positions based on this bet, and when the bet pays off or goes wrong, they get billions in return. But here's where it gets dangerous. These bets aren't tied to anything real. They don't help people get jobs. They don't produce goods. They don't fund startups or feed families. They just exist to transfer wealth. Huge amounts of wealth, with one major caveat. If the bets fail, the losses don't just vanish, they get shifted onto you, the taxpayer. Let's take a moment to reflect on 2008. That year, AIG, a giant insurance company, was so deeply embedded in the derivatives market that when the housing bubble burst, they couldn't cover their losses. The total amount they had to cover was estimated to be $180 billion money they didn't have. So, who covered it? You. The government stepped in, bailing out AIG and the entire financial system. Because without the bailout, the global economy would have collapsed. And guess what? The ones who profited from this crisis weren't the working class, the ones whose homes were foreclosed, or the people who lost their jobs. It was the elites. Now, let's talk about the other piece of the puzzle, the central bankers. The Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank. These institutions are more than just watchdogs of the economy. They are the architects of our financial systems. The modern central banking system is essentially a monopoly that controls the supply of money. And what's the most powerful tool in their arsenal? The ability to print money. That's right, whenever the economy falters, central banks can just print more money, increasing the money supply and lowering interest rates. In theory, this is supposed to stimulate the economy, but in reality, this action enriches the ultra-wealthy. You've heard of quantitative easing, right? It's a fancy way of saying, we'll just pump trillions of dollars into the financial system to keep things moving. The thing is, those trillions don't end up in the hands of the people who need them most. Instead, they flow to the top, to the hedge funds, to the private equity firms, and of course to the 7 families we're talking about. Between 2008 and 2020, The Federal Reserve added over $4 trillion to the economy. But did that money trickle down to you? Of course not. The stock market soared, housing prices exploded, and the wealth gap became more insurmountable than ever before. But the real question is, why does it keep happening? How is it that we're still suffering the consequences of 2008, yet the rich keep getting richer? The answer lies in moral hazard. This term refers to the idea that when big players know they can make unlimited bets and take unlimited risks without facing the consequences, they're going to keep playing the game. It's like a casino where the house always wins, and the players can lose as much as they want with no risk of going broke. Moral hazard ensures that the financial elites are always protected. If their bets go wrong, they get bailed out. If they make a fortune, they keep the profits. Meanwhile, you're left holding the bag. But let's take this one step further. The elites have perfected the game. They've engineered a financial system that is designed to perpetuate their wealth and power for generations. They control the markets, control the regulations, and even control the way information is distributed. This isn't just a system, it's an empire, and it's all built on debt. So, here's the big question. What happens next? We're standing on the edge of another collapse. The game that the top 1% know, the top 7 families have been playing for centuries, is on the brink of disaster. But unlike 2008, the next crash won't just be an economic blip. It will be global. And it will be faster than ever before. The next crash is coming. But it won't look like the last one. It will be instantaneous. Central banks have already pumped in over $9 trillion in the last decade. Inflation is rising rapidly. The stock market bubble is at historic highs. And yet, the real economy, the one where the average person works hard to pay their bills, is stagnant. The elites are already preparing. They're hoarding resources, pushing for more deregulation, and they know they will be fine no matter what happens. It's you and I who will bear the consequences. So, the big question is, are we truly learning from the past, or are we preparing for the same crash, just in a new disguise? The system we've created is built on borrowed time. Time we don't have left. We must ask ourselves, are we willing to accept this reality, or are we prepared to question everything and make a real change? Let's be honest, the world isn't changing unless we take action. So, share your thoughts. Share your skepticism. Let's wake up to the truth before the crash happens again, and we're left with nothing. If this opened your eyes to the hidden forces shaping our world, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Let's not let history repeat itself. Let's not be the generation that stood by, too scared to change the course of destiny. Are we awake now, or just getting ready to fall asleep again?